Hello everyone, today I am looking at Planescape Torment for the PC from 1999. This was a really interesting game, and a little bit frustrating in some ways. I finished it last night. It was actually pretty intense, the final fight, but Planescape, essentially, it has a lot of very nuanced concepts and ideas and philosophies. And the main kind of driving thing it has going is it takes the D&D alignment charts and kind of transforms it into different zones or planes of existence. So essentially you have the spire in the center, which is true neutral, and you have all these different universes or afterlives that essentially surround it. And so you have everything from, chaotic to lawful good, chaotic to lawful evil. You have total law and total chaos, and you have essentially a different kind of civilization that exists in each one of the planes and whatever. And so you essentially wake up and you are this warrior who has lost his memories, and you cannot be killed. You are immortal and you have no idea why. And the only person who wakes up beside you is this wise talking skull called Mort, who essentially says he kind of knows who you are, but is kind of leaving you out a lot of information. But he's this very funny sidekick guy, essentially. And so you set out on your quest to essentially find out who you are, and your only clues so far are that you find the old journal that your old body had, along with a man named Farod, who was in charge of bringing in the bodies into the mortuary. And the mortuary where you start, essentially, it's a giant collective cemetery. And so you will end up fighting zombies on your first run through, trying to get out of this place, navigating it, figuring out all the things, all the mechanics of how the game works. This is a Western-style RPG on the PC, so there's definitely some nuances here that I was not used to with typical RPGs. One of them being that, your party member limit is actually around 6 people. And there's a lot of different things that you can do to manage the weight and whatever. I mean, I was kind of thinking this might be like Fallout, so I gave myself lots of strength for weight, but you really never get over encumbered or anything. And so as you fight your way out of the mortuary, you kind of explore the town and navigate around and figure out exactly where you are and what the world is. And the strongest aspect of this game is probably world building and the philosophy. One thing that people say a lot about this game is that the writing is really good, and this is where I'd actually disagree. I think the ideas and the concepts and some of the writing is really good near the end of the game, but honestly, just getting through it, a lot of the dialogue, it repeats itself, it says itself in new different ways, but the way it's actually delivered is sometimes it's really good and sometimes it's really bad. Sometimes you're talking to a random NPC and they kind of fill you in on a lot of stuff you already know. Other times you'll find an NPC and they'll have a direct philosophical conversation, and it's through the dialogue that a lot of this game kind of becomes itself in a way. For example, there's not so many areas where you actually do a lot of combat. I found most of this game was actually dialogue oriented. It felt more like a visual novel in some way. And the characters are very well written. They're kind of fun. The world is very well written. I just feel like the only issue that I came up with is that the philosophy is really interesting because, again, it aligns with all those different elements of human nature. And also, as you get close to the end of the game, it talks about belief and sacrifice and identity and who you really are. What's the purpose of having a name? What's the purpose of having a body? What's the purpose of having death and a soul? What's the purpose of having companions? And things like this. And so it asks a lot of great questions, but I feel like it doesn't give a lot of great answers. Like, there's a lot of pondering, a lot of, oh, cool, that's the way that character sees it. In fact, there was one part where one character, I thought I was just having a philosophical debate with him about, reality and what he knows and what he doesn't know. And when I was able to essentially confront him on his view of the world of total certainty, and that there are things he didn't know, and that in order to better expand his horizons, he should travel the world. He actually got recruited into my party. And I thought that was super cool. I was like, oh, okay. I'm just used to talking to NPCs and getting experience points, but I actually convinced this guy to actually join me by having a philosophical debate, having a new party member. I thought that was actually really, really cool. But again, the issue I was getting to is at the end of the game, and I thought about this, you basically confront your mortal self or the essence of your mortality. And the issue is that you say, well, belief can change anything. Belief in the planes can move cities and mountains and whatever. And the entire point that that you separated your body from your mortality or your soul or whatever is because you had led a soul in full life, and your idea is that if you just kept living until you corrected and became a better person, you wouldn't have to go to hell. So, and what happens is, when you defeat your mortality, you become mortal, and then you have to die, and then immediately you get sent to hell. And it's funny that hell, as called Abyss and Capernaum or whatever, are actually places in the game that you do physically go. So, because this is all the afterlife, essentially. And so that's the way the game ends. It ends with the main character going to hell and picking up the battle on the plains. And this giant war that's going on between the lawful evil and chaotic evil faction of these demons. And I thought I just got the bad ending, but no, that's the ending no matter what. The only other ending is that you convince your mortality to merge with you. And I thought, oh, that's kind of lame, I guess, because the whole point that they were building up to is that belief can change anything. It can change the nature of a man, which is one of the core questions that I think this game really produces. And it's really amazing, again, how interesting and how philosophical the game is. And to change the nature of a man, there's like 20 things they say, oh, you can love, betrayal, death, hope, faith, etc. And I find it so interesting that, the game's message kind of at the end, that what the character is choosing to say is that it's belief, but no matter what you do, you're still not escaping your fate. And I found that was very, kind of lame, kind of a letdown. Like that's what they were kind of ramping up to, and they just kind of dropped it, I guess. I think in an ideal world, you would have multiple endings depending on what alignment you had. But yeah, that's just like one gripe I had with it, but it's a very fascinating game where the philosophy of each character is very much thought out, and when you interact with them, you're getting a full dialogue. And honestly, that's what I kind of didn't like about the game. It was a lot of dialogue, like from every NPC everywhere. It was frankly kind of overwhelming. And so once I reset my expectations, I got better with the game. And so funnily enough, when I first started this game, I actually, I put it down after like the first hour or so because I was not enjoying it. It was a very slow burn. I didn't really like the atmosphere or the setting. I didn't know where things were on the map, and I decided I'm not going to play this. And it was, in fact, like a little YouTube video essay that reeled me back in. And when I started playing again, I realized that I had made two major mistakes. One, I decided to treat it like a visual novel, so I focused more on the story, the narrative, and the expectation that there's going to be more dialogue and more reading than actual gameplay. And then I was able to, appreciate a lot more. The other aspect that I also changed is using the tab button. So I didn't realize this, but when you hold down tab, it highlights everything in the environment that is actually interactable and useful, kind of like Death Stranding, but for like a 2D isometric RPG. And so because there's a lot of detail in the environment, there's a lot of stuff you can see that you can interact with. And I didn't realize that if you held down this button, it highlighted everything, including the areas in which to go to the other parts of the town. So, funnily enough, or aggravatingly enough, there's a part of the town where there's a gate that goes to the western part or the eastern part or whatever. And if you walk to that gate, you can actually walk to it, walk through it, and it won't trigger the load to the next area. What you actually have to do is you have to click in a specific area where your cursor changes. And I was playing for hours until I never noticed this. It's only when I came back and played it a second time that I realized, oh, wait a second. my cursor changes when I hover over this thing. And then I also realized, oh, if I hold down tab, it'll always highlight that. And once I realized that one simple trick, I was able to basically play the game very, very well. Aside of that, the main gameplay components, it works more or less like any other RPG, like Knights of the Republic. And by the way, this game reminds me of Knights of the Republic quite a lot in the sense and style, I guess the cast a little bit, but more so the philosophical points where, really you have a character like Kreia who's saying, well, the Jedi are trying to be too good and too repressive, while the Sith are trying to be too passionate with their emotions. And she kind of sees a Force death in between things. She kind of has this nihilist Buddhist thing going on about her, and to remove the Force itself from reality. And you'd have these conversations and these confrontations with these characters, and it was really refreshing and nice. And that kind of energy is still definitely in this game. It's a little bit scattered here and there, but there's more of it as well, because each character has a certain philosophy that they're embodying and defending, and I think it's really, really cool. Again, it's just that I don't know. I feel like maybe the game might have been better if it was all voice acted, or maybe if it got rid of the descriptions. Like when I encounter a new character and talk to them, it gives them a whole paragraph describing what they look like, when I can kind of more or less see what they look like. And then you always say, greetings, who are you, what are you doing? And a lot of times they might repeat themselves or say things you already know. So it's the one example where there's really good, interesting writing and good debates and philosophy. But one, you have to expect that from this RPG. And two, you have to drudge through a lot of non-good writing to get the unfortunate reality. And so you go around as the nameless one because you don't remember your name. And so you talk to a lot of characters, and a lot of the way you level up in this game is by talking to characters, either by a certain dialogue trees. It's not like you talk to someone and their dialogue goes away. It's always there. So you have to keep in mind the mental tree of dialogue options to see if you expounded all the very possible variables of that conversation to get all that extra EXP or get a new quest or whatever. The other way that you level up is, of course, through combat, and there are, 3 main classes that your main character can be as, which is that it was Mage, Thief, and Warrior. So Warrior using larger weapons, things that have a higher damage output, but you get really no added benefits. It's all just damage output. Number 2 is Thief, where you're better at small ranged weapons against certain items can only equip by certain classes, both defensive and offensive. You have 2 earrings, 2 rings, a bracelet, and you also have a special thing in this game, which is interesting, which is 3 tattoos. And so tattoos from this one parlor guy will give you special power depending on what you get. It's also funny that you can just swap the tattoos in and out. It's not a big deal. It kind of makes sense for the main character because he's undead and his skin is kind of peeling off and whatever. He's kind of zombified. But for the other characters, they're just normal. And some of them you can't even equip tattoos. Very appropriately, the skull can't equip anything. He's just a floating talking skull, and I love Mort. He's a great character. And the last class that you can play as is Mage. And so Mage is on the far side. It doesn't have, Mage has no special weapons or attributes. In fact, I don't think you can equip any weapons. You just can use your fists, but you have a library of spells at your disposal. Maybe not when you start, but it works very much kind of in Final Fantasy in the Blue Mage, where you don't exactly copy enemies' attacks or magical attacks, but if you find a scroll that's like a one-time use kind of thing, you can instead copy it to your spell book, and every time you fall asleep and awake again, you can use that spell in between rests. So it's not like a daily reset or an hour reset, like you have to rest to refill it. The other cool thing about that system, and I ended up loving the Mage a lot, this is my favorite one, because you can also stack spells, kind of. For example, if you have a crescent spectral axe that you throw at someone, in your spell book, you have the spells on the right and the slots on the left in your spell book. And so it's a really cool system where however many slots you have, you can just fill them in with your spells. But it doesn't say anywhere that you have to use different spells. So if you just want, 5 spectral axes, and just use that, then that's what you can do. There are, of course, different levels of spells, and they organize it from 1 to 9. So everything from giving you, extra agility, extra armor, like a magic missile that does a little bit of damage, to things like thunderstorms and lightning bolts and gigantic death rays and vulnerability shields and all that stuff. And what I really love about the system is that it doesn't cost any magic. It's just like you use it once and that's it. Honestly, I'm much more fond of the system that I don't have to calculate cost. I just have to be like, is this the most strategic moment to use this attack now? Knowing that I can still use it later. It's not a one-time thing. You can experiment and do things. And I find it very positive, honestly, as a magic user. Of course, you might get frustrated in some areas where, using magic is really not possible. Your spells can get interrupted. It's rare. But I think the first time I'd said wow as a mage when I got Death Cloud, and this works on almost everything besides Machine, which are very rare, which is that you cast Death Cloud and there's like a 90% chance to insta-kill everything on screen. And I thought, and I'm going to bring 2 of them with me per day, and I thought, wow, that is very overpowered. And so, yeah, and the cool thing is you can swap in between classes. There's different people who tutor you. You kind of have to remember where they are on the map. Some of your party members can actually train you and teach you new skills and train you in the ways of a thief, mage, or fighter. For example, Anna is one character who can do that. And I might as well talk about the rest of the cast. So you have Anna, who is a adopted tiefling to the main grave robber, mainly, that you meet, Farad. And so she joins you on your quest. You also have Dakon, who is a Gith, who in his realm, probably the most interesting concept I've ever heard. He comes from a plane of total chaos where you need to have an ordered, just, and exact mind in order to shape the matter or antimatter into real matter. And I think it's the coolest concept that I've ever seen, which is that his sword is not composed of a light like a lightsaber, but it's composed of consciousness. So if he loses faith in himself or whatever, his blade actually becomes wobbly and dissipates. And he's kind of like an elven kind of, looking guy. Mort, I've already talked about him. He's like a slick New York kind of guy who's trapped in this skull, and he's, he has like a pretty interesting backstory where he came from, but as a character, he's the most, refreshing. He's the most refreshing because he feels like someone out of like a Hollywood movie or something more contemporary who's been placed in this crazy situation. And so he's kind of like the comic relief a little bit. It's also funny, they call him a Mimir, which is of course based on the Norse mythology of the talking head attached to whatever, and I thought of God of War, obviously. And Mort is very much like that. He's the talking head and the knowledge, but he also has a big part in the story as well to your identity. Anna's, of course, kind of like the main love interest. Besides her, there's also Fall from Grace, who is this higher plane angel Deva or something. And so, or no, I'm sorry, she was a Tanari succubus. And in the demon world, you have the Batori and the Tanari. And so they were constantly at war, and so she was abducted and tortured for like centuries. And then she opens up this brothel, and so she decides to reform herself, and it's a brothel of intellectual pursuits. So there's things like knowledge, emotion, and not just pleasure, essentially. And so she joins your party, and she's very useful for healing spells. In fact, she has no main weapon of choice. She just uses her hands, and she's all about essentially using casting spells, healing spells, and a few offensive ones like lightning and stuff like that. I forgot Anna's the thief, so obviously she can do that. Mort is Mort. He's a fighter technically, but he has a lot of very funny attributes. One of his main actions is called Litany of Curses, where he basically cusses out the enemy and turns them into like rage mode. There's also oh man, I'm forgetting the last few now. But there's a bunch of kind of optional late game party members. One of them being Ignis the Infernal. who is a man who is perpetually set on fire and has kind of an evil alignment to him, and he serves you because you try to quench his fire out. You also have a guy called Valator, who is this giant suit of armor that is possessed by the spirit of a mercy killer that believes in absolute justice, regardless of, the spirit of the law. And finally, there is also an optional party member called Nordom, who is this robotic creature from the law, or from the plane of law, essentially, and order. And so even though he's a machine, he's been corrupted by chaos energy, and so he develops a personality and a persona, and he follows you around, essentially, as your companion. And so all these characters come together, and they work together in different ways. I forgot Dakon, he's a fighter / mage, and so he uses magic and physical abilities. And he's actually pretty cool, because he has a lot of very unique abilities that, give everyone shields, shoot out fireballs, and, give people, a damage boost and stuff like that. And so you have a very colorful cast of characters, not only in their personalities, but also in their play styles and what they do in the game. It's really interesting. And usually the last character is like Ignis. He can use fire magic, for example, but he's also a fighter. Valator is a total, just a tank kind of character. And Nordom is a ranged fighter, the only ranged fighter. And it was very curious because, in each one of these characters' inventories, there's a whole section for quivers and for arrows the entire time. None of the characters use any ranged weapons except for one of them, which is an optional character in the late game. So I was like, okay, finally, I figured out who this is for. Another issue I ran into with this game is inventory management. There's a lot of things where you go to a dungeon and you want to keep a lot of the items essentially to sell later, but your inventory gets very full very quickly. Sometimes you'll leave it in a safe spot or something. But for the most part, sometimes you'll swap things between characters, give them a certain type of role for certain types of items to use. But inventory management became kind of a nightmare near the end of the game where, you're in a certain section, you just don't know when you're going to get out of it. You're kind of in the underworld, and you just have no idea when it's going to end. And you keep saying, okay, maybe if I stow my stuff here, stow my stuff there. And then finally you get to the last area of that place, and it locks you in. Essentially, you can't go back anyway. So, but yeah, for the most part, the game is fairly linear in how it delivers its story. As a good thing, you always know where to go next. You're never super lost. Your journal does work, and I've updated my journal. There's definitely a very clear, distinct line of what you have to do, where you have to go. Sometimes it's a little bit blurry and unclear, but for the most part, it's pretty well done and keeps track of your side quests very nicely. So yeah, a lot of the game is finding about your identity. You're immortal, so when you die, you lose your memories. So you're trying to figure out what you did in all of your past lives and things like that. And you're also trying to figure out, not only who you were, but who you want to be, and what it means to be mortal, what it means to be immortal, and what it means to have a name, mind, a soul. The game is very philosophical about these precepts, and I find them just super interesting, just at least being discussed. I just wasn't expecting it. And honestly, in the first area where you're kind of in this rundown, weird town, you're in a crypt, you're fighting zombies. Frankly, I don't care. I did not care until YouTube convinced me to go back and give it another shot. Because in all honesty, it's just very, I don't know, very dark, depressing, redundant. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what my goal is. I don't know what my purpose is. And it's only until maybe the midpoint of the game it becomes very clear. You get on a good pacing of doing your objectives, your tasks, your missions, etc. And this is one of the few games, and I hate people saying this, but this is one of the few games where it does actually get better the more you play it, or it gets good at this part. So if you can just struggle through that first bit, that first few hours, it starts to pick up much better. Again, getting used to the amount of dialogue and just, I don't know, maybe the way it's written. I don't know. I think if I had to do it differently, what I would do is I would get rid of the introductions. I would try to stick mostly to dialogue and only inject descriptions or observations when necessary. Things like that. I also try to make a point of highlighting which part of the plane each character is from, so it makes sense why they believe what they believe. But again, overall, it's very well done, and I love the environments. The music kind of grew on me as kind of atmospheric. It does kind of fade out quite a bit here and there, so I'm not sure how I feel about that. Because when you're just reading stuff over and over and over again, and all you have is kind of, filler sound / music in the background, it can be kind of an attention killer. But again, it's something that I found myself going through because, again, like I said, the writing picked up a lot by the midpoint of the game. It got much, much better. And it became less about, the guy pursuing, his journal and this guy, Farrod. And you have a lot of mystery, but there has to be that piece of mystery that's very present. Like, okay, there's this guy who tried to give me a message and he went in that direction. Well, okay, we're going to go in that direction now. And that leads you to a new mystery and whatever. And so when they open up the hive, to the player, initially, you have no idea where to go. All these random people are talking to you. You're having all these conversations. You have no idea what's useful or not. You have no idea if what you're doing is the right thing, and you just get bogged down by all this dialogue, which is great. But if I were to do it differently, I would have those NPCs spawn in later in the game. So again, you don't get overwhelmed with all this stuff and do all the cool dialogue all at once and then say, okay, now we have to shift gears, essentially. The other one problem I do have with this game, that's the thing, I want to recommend this game. I want this to be at a 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10 game because it has really interesting concepts in it and they're really well discussed in certain parts. But it feels a little bit jumbled and not directionless, but it's one of the few games where I was playing it. I could not gauge how far away from the ending I was. Usually you get an achievement like, oh, you've beaten half the game, or you get a certain item, or, you might accidentally check out a walkthrough to figure out what to do next. And you can see it's, number 50 out of 100 videos. So like, okay. But as I was playing this game, I had no sense of time scale. I was saying, am I a quarter of the way through? Am I halfway through? Am I 3/4 through? And am I expected to go to all the planes of existence? Because at first it seems like you are going to do all planes, and then it doesn't, and then it does again. And so there's this whole part or this whole section where you're stuck in the lower planes, like I said. And the other thing that was my tell was the world map. So you can go more than halfway through the game and you only fill out maybe like a third of the map. And the last 10 to 15% of the game, you fill out the rest of it in like a few hours. Because you essentially go to the demon world, and in the demon world, like each area is like an entire thing on the map. And that's also very misleading because at a certain point in the game, when you've discovered the whole town, essentially, it automatically activates fast travel. So when you go to that loading area, it doesn't load the next area automatically. It actually brings up your map and you choose where to travel. The thing is, you click that area and then you click travel at the bottom. And this was unfortunate for me because what happened was I had a full party with Ignis. I looked up online how to release him, and maybe I should have waited till later. But in any case, I got Ignis, and we're going through the demon world, and I meet Valator, and I accrued Valator to my party. But then I realized, oh wait, I do have a party limit, so I had to take Ignis off. And I thought, okay, either he's going to stay there, or he's going to respawn at the bar, maybe where I initially found him, because I left him there. I talked to him, re-recruited him, said, okay, I'm not losing you forever. But I'd leave that demon area. I come back to the overworld. And when I click on the demon world to travel to and fast travel to, it doesn't work. It's grayed out as if to say, nuh-uh, you can't go back there, even though it's on the same map where the fast travel thing pops up anyway. So that was very disappointing. I thought, is he at the bar? No. And also in the circumstances of doing that quest, there's also this Tower of Skulls thing where it asks you, it tells you can answer any question you have. And so one of the questions is that, who am I? And it gives you, it asks for a sacrifice of sorts. And so but it gives you the answer of who you are. It gives you a tons of experience on your backstory. But the problem is Valator was slain by your first iteration, and his spear was so angry it inhabits his armor. So when he's there and the tower tells you your true identity, you have a revelation moment, but so does Valator. And Valator realizes you are his slayer, and so he turns on you, and you have to attack him and kill him. So at this point, I'm out of the 6 party member slot. And I thought, oh no, I'll have no one now to go up against the final fight. And now that it's going to happen, now that I'm back in the hive and I can, warp to the final place. And so that's what I was thinking. But then I remember the one side quest I hadn't done yet, because I hadn't experimented with the little cube thing, is the mod run cube. And the mod run cube, essentially when you put in the right, alignment, it sends you to the plane of law, where it's essentially a logical dungeon crawler meta video game, where these robots have made a video game for you to go through this place like a dungeon, and basically, do all the dungeony things that occur. And so you do all that, but in the process, you get a new party member, which is Nordum, which is again the chaos-infected mod run computer being. And so I did have a 6 party member, fortunately, for the final showdown. But it all kind of worked out as well, because Ignis, at the end of the game, if your alignment isn't evil, I believe, only if it's not evil on some level, when you warp to the final area, which is the Fortress of Regret, Ignis is turned against you by your mortal essence, and instead he becomes like the sub-final boss before you go to the final boss. And so that, in my context, in my game, actually made more sense, because it would make sense he's angry because I literally did abandon him in hell for this other new random more powerful guy that ended up betraying me anyway. So yeah, it's kind of a struggle to get used to the pacing, the atmosphere, the aesthetics, I would say overabundant dialogue. I feel like there's a certain amount where a player will stop reading if it's not interesting what they're saying. If it's a big revelation point, like at the end of the game, and they're talking about the philosophy of belief and friendship and all that stuff, and asking really hard questions, then I'm fine with reading a paragraph. But if there's more than 3 sentences of some hive thug talking to me about how he got his knife sharpened and how he's going to go gut, a bunch of people, I don't care. And so I did get into the habit throughout doing this campaign of just skipping dialogue. Of just being like, look, I simply don't care. I'm not doing this. I'm just not reading this because it doesn't interest me. And until something that I can't tell is interesting and worthy shows up, then I will read that. But yeah, I think the game really works against itself because there's such an abundance of dialogue that is not important. Imagine if you're playing Skyrim and the farmers have more dialogue than the Jarl. It's kind of like, okay, I can't spend so much time on this one character when they're just not important. Like, they're just a random NPC. If they're a main guy talking about, I was actually related to so-and-so and, she traveled with you and now whatever, like, that's fine. But again, it's the dichotomy of we want our world to feel real and lived in, but a lot of characters, like, are not important and you don't need to talk to them, but you feel like you do because they have all the stuff, right? They have all this, dialogue, so it has to be important, right? But it's not. I'll be completely honest, like, by the time I got to Cursed, which was this desert town, all the characters in there, they're all impoverished and depressed, and they all had like 1-2 lines of dialogue or repeated exact same lines that I recognized so I could skip them. That was so refreshing because it felt like I was doing the discovery part of the game where I had to cover, all the characters or all the whatever's are in place. And once I was in a position where I kind of expected what people to say, or they didn't say anything at all because they weren't important, it was a much better experience because I wasn't, in my eyes, wasting my time. I didn't have to bother with all this, ludicrous nonsense, essentially. And the characters who did talk a lot were important. It sounds like a basic concept, but if you don't get it right, it's very unappetizing. The other thing too, I think they just throw a lot of you at once, again, with a lot of useless dialogue, a lot of factions, a lot of, maybe not showing the controls very clearly. Like, again, I didn't know you could hold down tab. I didn't realize that the map had markers on it for, where you have to go, what you have to do, and things like that. Again, I also found the level up system in this game kind of weird. The characters level up, but then you have to go into the menu and say level up and distribute your points like Skyrim or something, right? But the problem is when most people level up in this game, including your party members, you just say accept. Like, besides Anna, who you can distribute thief points to, for example, things like pickpocketing, stealth, etc. Every other party member just like gets a stat bonus, and if you just don't click the thing to make sure, and every time you load a game save, they'll tell you, oh, I've leveled up, but they haven't actually leveled up. You just have to go and confirm it, and it kind of makes it like it should be like an automatic thing, and so they get their stat boost, and then you can assign the points, which are two separate things. You get like the charisma or the base stat boost, and then you also get the skill boost, which you do need to manage essentially. Again, and the whole overarching, quests in the initial thing are based around, okay, you have to find this guy. In order to find this guy, you have to do all this other weird stuff, and you really lose vision of the pacing. You lose the vision of the thing that you've been killed, you don't know how, you're investigating to find the guy. It feels like almost half the game, or at least a third of the game, you finally find the guy who found you, who didn't find you, his daughter found you, which is Anna, and then she takes you back to the place where she found you, and you investigate that place, and then you find this other half of the town, essentially. Or, wait, do you already in the lower wards by then? No, you don't. But yeah, you have to do so much just to find the guy, and for him to say, I don't know. And it's I know, it just kills the pacing. So that's what I'm saying. Like, Planescape is literally one of the games where it does get better. Like 5 or 6 hours in, it really does get much better. But yeah, I hate to say that, but it has a very weak opening. And again, just the music, the atmosphere, the total confusion of why we're doing this, where we're going, and why is this game fun? Is it really worth it? I'd say it is worth it, but that opening sequence is just not good. And in terms of gameplay, I'd say it's pretty satisfying. It feels really good, honestly, just playing as a mage, because you have all these, all the powerful attacks just do this super cool effect. It almost feels, I think, a game like Final Fantasy, where you're the summoner and you're summoning a bunch of aeons or demons or whatever to kill the thing, and they do a little cutscene every time it happens, and it looks really, really cool. Makes you feel really, really powerful. And I've heard someone say it's the perfect combination of this is what Final Fantasy and a Western RPG looks like, or Final Fantasy and but yeah, it felt really cool. Like, you have a dragon shoot a laser beam, like Artemis shoot her arrows. Really cool stuff. So playing as a mage, honestly, I'm not sure if that's the correct way to play this game, but it was very, very fun playing. Honestly, it felt much more rewarding to start as a warrior who specialized in just attack, so you didn't have to worry about all these other, low-level creatures. And suddenly you were a thief, and you're like, oh, I get all these extra options, all these cool little abilities like lockpicking, stealing, sneaking. Stealth is super important. And then, by the time you recruit Anna into your party, she has all those powers anyway. So you think, okay, well, the next thing to be is a mage. And then once you get the mage, that's kind of the last class you can do. I think there's a way to glitch it. I've seen somewhere that you can glitch it yourself to get double classes. And there are characters who are default double classes, like Dakon, who is a fighter slash mage. Something weird actually happened in my game. So I was fighting Trias. The semi-final boss. After I killed him, just in the scene that I killed him, Anna also died. And what happened there, and I didn't notice it until much later, or not too much later, honestly, but we recovered all her items, but all of her thief gear, she couldn't equip it anymore. And I'm like looking at the screen, I'm looking at the thing, it says equipable by thief. Her class says thief/fighter. I think, and I was like, okay, why isn't this working? And I have no idea. I think it glitched or something, or I must have done something, because after that she couldn't equip her items, but the items she could equip were for fighters only, but not fighter slash thief. So I have no idea what that was. But my mind was, look, I'm in the end game right now. I've like already organized my stuff. I'm just gonna push through to the end, and if she can't equip her earrings or her tattoos, like whatever. I just kind of wanted to get the game over with, honestly. But yeah, I don't know, it's a really interesting thing that, from what I've been told about this game, that it's a classic, and playing it is a classic, but like near the end of the game when you start it, it's just so brutal. And I know I've been over this, but it really, like, you really need to give this thing a chance. And what I would say to people to recommend it is, look, guys, just come to the table, hear me out. Look, you can recruit a succubus into your party. Okay. How many games let you do that? Lewd or unlewd? How many games allow you to recruit a succubus? Just come on. It's actually funny because that's when it clicked for me. Not because I recruited a succubus, but in that area where I was in the town, it actually got really interesting because the whole sensate quest line was, these are the memories and experiences of people that have been compiled over time and preserved for people to re-experience in order to deepen their understanding of life. And I thought this is actually a really cool faction and idea and philosophy. And so this whole idea of satisfying intellectual lusts was, to me, like very, very interesting. And by that point, when she had come into my party, I decided about 4 or so party members, and I really started to feel this, I don't know, iconic energy that each one of these characters was, either through their skills or their personalities, bringing something completely different to the party, a different viewpoint. And there's something about the cast of characters that started feeling very iconic. The kind of feeling you get where you think, man, I could see fan art of all these characters interacting. Like, I can feel the soul through the character, for lack of a better word. I can feel the energy and the consistency and the idea behind all these characters coming together and creating a bigger whole than the character by themselves, essentially. And again, I love Mort, and he's like comic relief, but I don't know if he would be the best starting companion. I think he's a pretty good starting companion. They're kind of like Sancho Panza and Don Quixote. But yeah, at a certain point, at the midpoint of this game, I kind of felt the aha moment saying, oh, this is Planescape. This is the game. And I said, oh. And the dialogue got much better. It got more interesting, more intense. And once I hit that point where I just wasn't dealing with NPCs and thugs and real, concepts, I really started to enjoy it. And I kind of had that episodic feeling where once I had basically the main party established and we went into like the fancy sensorium or the scummy hive underground or, the higher planes of eternity and Elysium or the lower planes of the demon world, it kind of felt like, oh, this is a good cast of characters that feels episodic. Like I could see like a mini episodic series based on their adventures, and putting them in weird situations like they were a family or something. I really just connected with the game at that point where it kind of felt like it all came together when you're later in the clerk ward. There's also a lot of very interesting dilemmas that, there's how many different RPG dilemmas can there be? Like, oh, my carrots were stolen by the bandits. Oh, this happened. There's one which is pretty crazy. This guy's daughter gets sold into slavery by raiders. A more interesting one is a woman is widowed. Her husband is framed, and he paid off all these debts, but the debt collector basically destroys the evidence that he did. And so you have to find the evidence of this. Otherwise, this once noblewoman is going to be sold into slavery. And it's kind of like, whoa, this is pretty crazy. And pretty interesting too. Besides that, though, again, I just remember the pacing being so off because they talked about the higher levels of the hive, or the place where the Lady of Pain was, and I thought, okay, well, I'm going to go there next. Nope, you're going on a wild goose chase for this witch who made you in this maze, and then that's going to lead you to the demon world. Like, it was just all over the place. I had no idea where it was going, what was going to happen. And yeah. The one other thing too is, again, the Lady of Pain. She's this character who's this kind of eternal being who watches over the planes. She's, I guess, the game master. She just shows up and kills you in a glance if she wants to. And she's, the main icon with the face with the mask. And the symbol of Torment is that little dagger symbol that essentially reveals, the point and purpose of the game. And so pain and torment and belief are kind of intertwined in a weird way, where it's interesting. Everyone in the planes is suffering in a different way, and they're trying to find reasoning for their suffering. And it's almost through torment and through the pain that the character's redeemed, except, again, that doesn't actually happen at the end of the game. He's actually still condemned despite his struggles and his journey. And I just thought that, like, the ending of the game is so weird. It kind of felt like they wanted a badass ending and then, like, maybe have a sequel where it's like all combat based, and I don't know, just it had like Prince of Persia Warrior Within vibes. And I appreciate it. I think it's really cool, but it felt like, in a way, a total betrayal of what the game was going for, and also missing the mark in terms of, I don't know, the tone of the game. Like, missing the mark, like, that felt like the bad ending. Like, there is another ending, right? No, there wasn't. So, but yeah, overall, I am super glad I stuck with this game and I played it and I kind of punched it out, because it is an amazing philosophical roller coaster. It has so many cool features to it, so many nifty mechanics. Combat is satisfying and fast-paced. Oh, the biggest thing, I forgot to mention this. The most important thing in this RPG that I adore and I am so grateful for is that because the main character is undead, that when you die, you just respawn at the start of the dungeon or the area that you're in. And I cannot emphasize how good that is, because in every other RPG I've played, when the main character dies, you have to load the last save. That means you lose all your items, you lose all your experience, and you lose your time. And here, you can essentially keep your items, keep your experience, and you only lose time. And it's much, much better. And you're usually much closer to picking up where you left off anyway. The only big danger, honestly, is when your teammates die. Because for some reason, when your teammates die, they drop everything they're carrying. And it's a nightmare to go pick that up, or if you actually pick up their stuff. Either way, you have to have them go pick up their stuff. You can resurrect 3 people per day until you rest. And you have to reorganize their entire inventory from everything they dropped. That is an absolute pain. That is the torment of Planescape, honestly. But for the main character, it's a miracle worker. And honestly, sometimes it's a strategy. Because sometimes you want the main character to die before the final boss of that dungeon, because if he does die, he just gets full health, and all the people just spawn with you to where you go. So it's much more, I don't know, understandable, reasonable, very fun. I don't know. I think about other, I think people call this a CRPG, which is computer RPG, which is say it's like Dungeons and Dragons, but not. I just call it an RPG. But I think compared to other games in this genre, like, I don't know, right now Baldur's Gate 3 is super popular. And I can understand and see the parallels of like a very, very heavy focus on writing, on dialogue, on building characters and building the world to the sense where it's a detriment to the experience. And personally, I don't know. My experience with Baldur's Gate 3 was that it was very character focused and not much else. I really loved the intro with the Mind Flayer and like, okay, setting up something, but then it became very character focused. And not that the characters were bad. Honestly, what turned me off were the NPCs and their struggles, like the tiefling cattle farmers, like we had to protect the cows. And I don't know, there was something about it where I understand why people praise this genre of game, or this game in particular, because in its own genre, the writing on the philosophical standpoint of, not just the characters, but the universe is so much more interesting. And so I really enjoyed the heavier concepts in Planescape rather than the overly focused character ones. And it makes me think, as much as Baldur's Gate 3 has gotten praise, I would love to see more of the style of conversations and dialogue in this game brought over to that one, or at least mixing a little bit. Because I think it would be a really great combination and make me, I don't know, just at least appreciate Baldur's Gate 3 more than just a character companion fanfic simulator. Yeah, that's pretty much the main thing, if I'm being. But yeah, Planescape is not perfect. It has its ups and downs, more like going down at the start and going way up near the end, and then kind of like, I would say, fumbling it on the final confrontation. But man, again, like everything up to that point. I mean, if you ask me how should it have ended, it should have been through his belief alone. He would be able to unmake himself, because that's the whole thing is driving at. It's belief in your companions, belief in your friends, the afterlife, and that belief can change a man, and that you actually prove it. But here they just say it's a theoretical possibility that you're not able to do at that point. I thought maybe it was missing charisma, but the way you actually do it is you get some special golem's dagger, and that basically lets you kill yourself, and you ransom yourself to your immortality, so you can say that, look, we should merge, and then you don't have to do the final boss fight. So that just circumvents the final boss fight and releases like a new nature of, this character or creature, but it doesn't really add to the themes or depths or tone of the game. And I love games based on belief. I just felt like they really, really dropped the ball on that point. I think it'd be way more interesting to, again, have belief be the deciding factor. What does change the nature of a man? And for those of you who are curious, I said death, because it's through death that we've gained our memories or lost our memories or changed what we've done as we approach death. But yeah, it's kind of like these are all different philosophies, different ways of thinking, but none of them really it's kind of like, what if you did have someone who believed in absolute chaos and absolute order confront each other and not just have a debate, but actually have some kind of reconciliation, some kind of meaning. So that's what I'll say. This game is very good at introducing these philosophies, explaining them, and having them kind of compete. But the game itself doesn't really, the game itself does say a lot of things, a lot of claims, but at the end, I think it just fumbles it. I don't know. I still think it's very worth it, though. This is literally like a game for intellectuals, big brain game. Other things I should mention, sound effects are absolutely fantastic in this game. Very iconic, very unique. Of course, the one thing you're going to be hearing for like however many hours, I should check how many hours I've put in this game, maybe like 40, a good 40, is I've updated my journal. There are some conversations where you'll be with certain characters and every piece of dialogue is like lore important, and so you'll just hear I updated my journal like back to back for the entire conversation. It's so ridiculous. And I do love the dialogue in this game. I love the branching dialogue, how you can, choosing the first option is not going to always net you the most experience. You want to kind of try to pay attention and catch those third or fourth options that lead you to a new conversation where you can do something really cool and something really new. And I always felt like I never was lacking in the charisma stat to unlock all those conversations. It always felt really, really good. I think the most useless stat in this game or skill is detect traps. Even if you, it doesn't even work half the time. And when it does, you can't disable a trap. So it's like, okay, there's a trap there. I'm going to take damage anyway. And when you do take damage, it's like 2. So it's the most useless, non-threatening skill effort. I think that'd be interesting. An RPG completely centered around traps and dodging traps. I think Deception is a game that kind of is like that, but it's not an RPG. Anyway, and I do love later in the game where the characters start having these conversations amongst each other. It feels really fun and really cool. And again, the characters, they get really cool, powers by the end. And if the game is so much better to where it ends to where it started. And I do love how it ends where it starts. We go back to, where it all began, and you find the secret portal and you go to the final boss. And you confront yourselves, your past selves, the intentions of your past selves, and incorporate themselves into you, and you kind of confront the final self, which is your fear of death, really. And yeah, so I said it was death that changes man. So I'm right. I'm right. But yeah, that is Planescape Torment, a absolutely fantastic, amazing RPG. It absolutely deserves to be called a classic. I don't know if I'd streamline or mainline some mechanics or some aspects of the game if it was made today. But I think if this game was made today using the same engine and graphics as Baldur's Gate 3 along with voice acting, this game would make bank. This thing would blow everyone else out of the water because the story is immaculate and amazing and really, really cool. And yeah, it even has these little flirtatious, sexy scenes that even Baldur's Gate has. Like, the funniest thing is that the tiefling is really into you, even though she doesn't want to be. She's a very tsundere, and but she'll make out with you in front of all your party members, and like they'll make comments on it, and it feels awkward and funny and all that stuff. But yeah, it's I don't know. It's I can see why people think this is one of the best games of all time. It has that energy and that gravitas to it, and it's very, very intellectual, I would say. You know, you have to be, I think, a little bit older to fully appreciate all the different viewpoints, philosophies, and if they're referencing Christianity or Buddhism or whatever, and what they're driving at. Anyway, guys, very cool game. Glad I stuck with it. Again, not perfect, but I'm overall, I'm actually very happy I played this. This is the game where I've been thinking about it the 24 hours since I beat it, and I'm probably going to think about it in the future, and that isn't a classic. I don't know what is. Anyway, guys, with all that being said, I'll see you later. Bye.